We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These immortal words, penned by our founding father and third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, are a secular American expression of the redemptive truth that the Jewish people has championed for as long as we have had a distinct identity and heritage. As it is articulated in our Torah, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And God created the human in God's image. In the image of God, God created them. Male and female, God created them. The Torah, however, does not take these truths to be self-evident. On the contrary, as the Talmud explains, it was critical for the Torah to state explicitly that all humans were created in God's image. It was necessary to declare unequivocally that we are all descended from a common ancestor, lest we fall prey to the designs of demagogues and self-styled supermen. Because we are all brothers and sisters, and we are all equal, then no one can claim to be born with the power to rule over another human being. No one can say, my ancestor was better than yours, for the sake of setting up a hierarchy with himself on top. By instituting a covenantal relationship with the one and only true sovereign, the singular and all-powerful God, with mutually agreed upon terms that, unlike human rulers, God commits God's self to uphold faithfully and never to transgress. Our forefathers and foremothers rooted this radical equality into our people's spiritual DNA. Israelites must always affirm that all are created equal, and therefore all must receive equal and just treatment under the law. Jews must always be engaged in the work of flattening hierarchies. We are charged to push back on authoritarianism and other societal distortions, to seek reparative justice rather than revenge, to make our legal norms and systems equally concerned with for the well-being of the guilty as for the avenging of the victim, to smash idols, not people. And who was the first smasher of idols? Father Abraham, of course. Almost everyone who has a basic Jewish education will recall the famous midrash of Abraham destroying the idols of his father's shop. My first memory of this legend, just for reference, is the playful portrayal of it in the 1990 stop-motion animation special, The Animated Haggadah. So beloved is this legend that folks are often surprised to learn that it is not actually written in the Torah. I'll summarize it in case it's been a while since you've learned it. And you should recall that prior to entering relationship with God, our ancestor was given the name Avram. So that's what I'll call him when talking about his early life. Avram's father Terach, the story goes, was an idolater. Not only that, he was an idol maker. He operated a rather successful idol shop in the ancient Mesopotamian metropolis of Ur-Kasdim. One day, Terach was called to a meeting. I like to imagine he had to go to an idol maker's continued education course to learn about the newest materials and authorized representations for posing the various local gods. And he asks his son Avram to mind the store. In his father's absence, Avram takes a rod and smashes all the idols in the shop except the biggest one. He places a rod in the last statue's hand and waits for his father to return. When asked why he broke the idols, Avram replied, "All I did was bring the idols food to share, and they began to fight over it." Suddenly, the biggest idol grabbed the rod and began to smash all the others. Upon hearing this, Terach exclaimed, "Do you think I'm a fool? Everyone knows these statues cannot move and they cannot eat." And to this, Avram answers, and I always think of this in Mel Brooks's voice, "Aha! Exactly." This dramatic tale teaches us much more about what made Abraham special, besides his opposition to graven images. By destroying idols, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his father's livelihood and his family's reputation. We, his descendants, must therefore search out the idols in our lives and destroy them, especially when this comes with difficulty. Abraham was not afraid to confront authority figures, even his own father, in order to uphold what he knew to be true. Therefore, we are all taught to trust ourselves before relying on the assertions of the powerful among us, even our rabbis. Rather than repudiating the idols outright, Abraham employs kind and persuasive argumentation to justify his actions, gently enabling Terach to arrive at the absurdity of idol worship on his own. When we uncover the misguided reasoning and ignorance of another human being, as Jews, we must try to always speak softly and lovingly, since we all have blind spots, and we are all deserving of patience and understanding when we make our mistakes. Another lesser-known midrash about Father Abraham highlights once more the importance of intellectual refinement and integrity in service of breaking down the hierarchy. It is told that one day young Avram was walking. Where he was going, nobody knows, when he came upon a palace on fire. He looked around for help, but no one else seemed to notice the flames. Shouting at passers-by for assistance, he was met with scoffing and derision. Don't you know that the king has decreed that castles may not catch fire? To this Avram cried, surely this palace has a caretaker who cares that it is burning. And suddenly the Holy One shouted from within the conflagration, I am the master of this place, and you have rescued me. In the immortal words of Eeyore, the third most popular and famous talking donkey of history, thanks for noticing. There's a lot to unpack in this very brief story. First, Avram is actively engaged with the world and walking through it. He is not sitting at home studying esoterica. He is out there making connections, broadening his awareness of how the world works, and stretching his field of ethical concern in the process. He is thoughtful. He is unwilling to deny his own experiences and observations in the face of popular falsehoods. His own eyes and ears perceive the blaze, and no decree from flesh and blood can make him doubt his eyes and ears. He calls out to help to save another's property. He claims responsibility for his fellow's well-being like his own. And notably, it is because of these moral strengths that God recognizes him as covenantal material, crediting him with rescuing God from being forgotten amidst the not so self-evident flames of a world on fire. One last story about our beloved ancestor. When Avram had his spiritual awakening, he did not hesitate to share his discovery with anyone who'd listen. Eventually, word of the disruptive cult to the one and only God reached the court of King Nimrod, who is described in the Torah as the first man of might on earth. Nimrod fancied himself as a god, and because he was mighty, he was a skilled hunter and charismatic leader, leveraging his might to bring others under his command. To have a lowly idol maker's son challenge Nimrod's divinity, if there is one God, then there can be no other deity, would certainly invite the king's anger. He sent for Avram and condemned him to die by fire, to which Avram replied, but wouldn't it be more fitting to drown me, since the God of water always wins against the God of fire? And then he said further, but then again, wouldn't it be better to have me crushed by a tree, since the God of wood can make objects that float above the waters? And then once again, Avram said, but maybe it would be more fitting to pile heavy stones upon me, since stones can sink wooden ships. And so he continued until Nimrod lost his patience. Dayenu, take this madman away from me. Nowhere in this cute little Chad Gadya story does Avram include Nimrod, not even as a minor player in the cosmic drama. Nimrod and Avram are equals, because as far as the natural world is concerned, all human beings are the same and meet the same fate. Nimrod has no alternative but to see Avram as a madman, because Avram proposes a paradigm that was previously unheard of since the days of Noah. That even Nimrod, mighty as he was no different than Avram, and that both owe their existence to the unique force beyond their control and comprehension. We, the grandchildren of Abraham, are the inheritors of this new paradigm, and it is our sacred mission to share it with the rest of humanity. Still, it is not always easy to be the quote-unquote light unto the nations. It takes effort and practice, and often comes at the terrible cost of persecutions, expulsions, and genocides. The hatred stoked and wielded by tyrants are evidence of the disruption to hierarchical thinking that the Jewish message provides. This should not be misunderstood, God forbid, as a directive for Jews to proselytize. You don't go to medical school to learn how to make more doctors. You go to learn how to heal people. You don't read a book to exercise moving your eyes across the page. You read a book to enjoy the story, learn information, find answers. I did not go to rabbinical school to learn to make more rabbis. I went to learn how I can marshal the resources of our tradition to improve my life and the lives of others, and to advance a larger vision and purpose for being alive and sentient in this vast and lonely universe. There is a big difference between spreading the word of God as conveyed by the medium of Jewish peoplehood and practice, and making our peoplehood and practice the end goal. We are meant to accomplish something greater than our survival and continuity. The Jewish people, unlike other Abrahamic communities, has no investment in expanding its numbers just for numbers' sake, or in making everyone act and think exactly the same. There is a kind of victory that is achieved when our core message moves others to good without pulling them into our tribe. Some Jews refuse to perform conversions at all because people do not need to be Jewish to acknowledge the divine and to refine the world. Human diversity is not only a good, but a necessity for proclaiming God's glory. As the Talmud teaches, when human leaders mint coins bearing their likeness, they all come out the same. But when the Holy One of Blessing mints coins bearing their likeness, each comes out different, and yet all are of equal value. Being Jewish is so much more than a struggle for continuity and obedience to arcane rules and rituals. It is about cultivating an attitude. It is about a way of approaching every interaction and deed as opportunities to serve and help others the way one would want to be served and helped. It is about recognizing that no one intrinsically is less worthy than anyone else. Though privileges are sometimes earned through effort, and more often through good fortune, no one truly loses their basic human rights: life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, to name a few. Taking up the role of liberators and iconoclasts is the most dangerous and challenging work in the world, and not only because of the hatred that this work invites. Time and again, our people has had to overcome the human propensity to believe that we are superior to others. The prophet Amos, the prophet of justice, called out rhetorically, "Are you better than those other kingdoms? Is their sphere of influence not larger than yours?" We are no better, stronger, or larger than any other nation, but it is easy to fall into thinking that we are. Unlike the celebrated political rebellions of modernity, the Jewish revolution cannot seek to replace the ruling class, but to do away with it altogether. Yet we often stumble along the way. From our valuing learning and inquiry, and our privilege of being able to sanctify our mundane existence with blessings and practices that turn each act into a reflection of something larger and transcendent, we have nurtured unholy prejudices against the intellectually and spiritually less fortunate. We've developed stereotypes and slurs that I do not wish to repeat, because it is likely we've all heard them, or worse, said them ourselves. Every day we commit sins against ourselves and the rest of humanity when we make the betterment of our world entirely about our personal advancement. When we deny assistance to one class or race to favor our own on the basis of superficial differences. When we insist upon recognition and rights for ourselves, but not for others. When we are made short-sighted by our pain and fail to see that this world is worse off when any and all human beings suffer. And we certainly have suffered. In medieval to early Enlightenment periods, Jews were known as the chosen people. Chosen for what? Chosen by a capricious God to favor unfairly above all others? Chosen to be different, persecuted and maligned for all eternity? Or perhaps Jews are the choosing people. With the rise of opt-in culture, doing Jewish is just one legitimate choice among many. Over the past century and a half, Judaism has become like a respectable hobby in tension with other opt-in options, but somehow superior because we choose it. Are we the only people that, all things being equal, can consistently make the right choices? Ashrei yoshevei veitecha. Oh, how proud are we who sit in your holy sanctuary. Proud that we are choosing to sit here every Rosh HaShana like it's jury duty, so we can commiserate triumphantly with coworkers and friends about how uncomfortable, unintelligible, and burdensome the synagogue experience, never mind the Zoom synagogue experience, was. Choosing what? Chosen for what? Are we chosen for prosperity? Are we chosen to the exclusion of all others? Do we choose to know God or to know ourselves? Do we choose to be God's slaves or God's partners? The shofar that we will remember this Shabbat and will hear this Sunday must herald in a new era of Jewish communal spirit and spiritual self-understanding. We cannot continue the fiction that we are the choosing people, for we are, like everyone else, overwhelmed with myriad options and defaulting to instinctual behaviors and mental shortcuts. And we also cannot go back to the old ideas connected to being the chosen people, chosen for glory and power and wealth. Ma'alim biktusha ve'ein moridim. We always aspire to progress and never to go back. Of tyrants we are warned in Parashat Shoftim, the king must not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since Adonai has warned you. You must not go back that way again. Once you've escaped one systemic injustice, once we've brought down a human hierarchy, we must be careful not to fall back into habits and patterns that, though familiar and comfortable, would lead to our re-enslavement, because we were slaves in Egypt, and we must never go back that way again. The prophet Isaiah heard God's voice saying, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And riffing on the words of our forefather Abraham, the prophet answered, "Hineni, here I am, send me." We are a people chosen to fight tyranny, to unmask false gods, to destroy idols, and challenge every form of human hierarchy. But more importantly, we are chosen through acts of loving kindness, charity, and justice to proclaim the principle of radical human equality. We are chosen to treat everyone with the same baseline of respect and care at all times, even while society seeks a place to define us by our jobs and economic value. We are called upon to honor everyone, from the lowliest, quote unquote, lowliest grocery delivery workers to the highest, supposedly highest office in the land, especially when we disagree with the choices and actions that they are making. Bad actions merely conceal the divine image, as clouds obscure the blue sky. But the blue sky is always there. The divine image is never lost. Even a single word of kindness can lift the clouds of error and misdeed, and just like that, share a taste of redemption with our beautifully complicated and painfully flawed world. We are chosen to be as kind to our enemies as we wish they would be to us. We are chosen to break out of the tidal shifts of imperial and national boundaries, to see our fellows' success as our own, and refuse to seek power over them, even if they will never cease in striving to overpower us. You cannot control another person's heart. You can only control your own. To close, I'd like to share a brief teaching from the first generation Babylonian sage Shmuel. Famously, he said, Ein bein haolam hazeh limot Mashiach, ela shibud malchiot bilvad. The only difference between this world and the Messianic era is the end of human power structures. This is a brief teaching, but a hugely important one. That the Messianic era, the world to come, will be in no qualitative way different from the world we live in, is not meant to discourage the downtrodden and reassure the comfortable. Rather, it is meant to point out the power of radical human equality. All the fantastic visions and delicacies for our redeemed universe pale in comparison to the transformation provided by the recognition that all are created equal. In a world without hierarchy, in a world where every person is seen and treated as a reflection of the divine, no one may lack for anything. In a world like this, I will feel the pain of my fellow human as my own, and I am moved to provide for their needs because their security and liberty are as dear to my heart as my own happiness and health. Every time I offer unearned kindness to another, every time I model unconditional respect and love, a window opens. At each smile and acknowledgement of humanity, at each free offer of assistance and understanding, for just a brief moment, a flash, a blink of the eye, the world to come is made real, and we are afforded a sneak peek of universal salvation. Our task is to string together enough of these brief moments so that we can forget what it is like to live in a state of cruel oppression and self-interest. We aren't waiting for the Messiah to bring about the new era. Rather, we each are charged with the hard work of becoming the Messiah of each and every moment that we are living in. This Rosh HaShana, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to save the world from hierarchical thinking and selfishness. Not by military or political might, not by accumulating wealth and spending it wisely, but by cultivating and acting with the awareness that we are all dust and ashes, and yet the universe would not be complete absent a single member of our human family. Constantly ask how you can show compassion and mercy to another person. Love them with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. Only then will you merit for God to show compassion and mercy to you. Shana Tova and Shabbat Shalom.